One of the barometers of looking at to how the entrepreneurial and the business class reacts to the elections in the country is to look at how the bourses are reacting. And what is interesting is this. The Wall Street stocks have ended the voting day with some pretty significant gains, and still the traders were bracing for high volatility once the voting results would come in. So as the presidential race will have major consequences for the future economic policy of the United States, the markets started the day earlier this morning relatively subdued. However, the Wall Street benchmarks ended with over 1% gains. And this comes even as the traders were getting up for a long night, of some heated vote tallying and wild fluctuations regardless of the results. The Bitcoin, Trump trade-related assets and gold are being watched very closely since they are considered to be good indicators of the election mood. But Trump trades began to unwind towards the end of the U.S. trading session. Now, Trump media stock closed over 1% lower after having surged nearly 15% earlier in the session. Bitcoin paired gains to trade well below $70,000, which it reached earlier in the day. But the top token was still up by nearly about 3%. In addition, the investors are also eyeing volatility indicators for Standard & Poor 500 and Treasuries. The Treasuries slipped on Tuesday with the bond volatility gauge hitting a one-year high. Alexander Hazes, the chief investment officer at Group Bank Richelieu in Paris, told Bloomberg, and I quote him here, "What you can see across the markets now is that no one is ready to take clear investment positions on this election." He further added that the uncertainty is pretty palpable across all asset classes, and there is such a massive gap between the program of the two candidates that caution is of the essence. Now, tech stocks propelled Wall Street higher initially on Tuesday. The Palantir Technologies surged by nearly 23% on record profits and high demand for its software. But what is interesting is that Palantir Technologies, that is backed by Peter Thiel, also ended up in the red as caution and volatility kicked in. The Standard & Poor 500 ended with over 1% gains and adhered to its historic trend. The day of the presidential elections has historically been a good day for stock prices. The Carson Group found that out of 11 election trading sessions, the Standard & Poor 500 index had ended the day higher 9 times. That is based on data of 11 years beginning from 1928 and omitting the years when the New York Stock Exchange had been shut. On an average, the index had risen by nearly about 0.9% on election days. Historically, the most recent instance of this is the index's 1.8% gain on the 3rd of November in 2020. So Tuesday's 1% gain adds to the historic trend. Still, the investors seem to be on the edge since this has been the most contentious and closely fought presidential campaign in recent memory. And strategists at Goldman Sachs have warned of potential post-election turbulence, but have cited the strong U.S. economy as a long-term catalyst for stock market strength. Now, Goldman strategists bet that there is a 1 in 5 chance of a 20% correction in the Wall Street benchmarks post the election outcome. And still, risks add up to a market that is primed for volatility this week, and options data suggests a 1.8% move in either direction for the Standard & Poor 500 on Wednesday, the day after the vote. Donald Trump cast his vote in Palm Beach, Florida. The Republican presidential candidate addressed the media, and in signature Trump style, he made some pretty headline-worthy statements. Listen in.
I have regrets. I can't think of any, to be honest, to use her expression. I can't think of any. I ran a great campaign. I think it was maybe the best of the three. We did great in the first one. We did much better in the second one, but something happened. And this was the best. I would say this was the best campaign we ran.
While listing his key priorities, the Republican candidate said that immigration remains the #1 issue and inflation has come second on the list. Trump also said that he will admit defeat, but it would have to be a fair election first.
If I lose an election, if it's a fair election, I'd be the first one to acknowledge it. And I think so far I think it's been fair. I think there's been a lot of court cases. Both sides are lawyered up. that there'll be no violence. Of course there'll be no violence. My supporters are not violent people. I don't have to tell them that. And I certainly don't want any violence, but I certainly don't have to tell. These are great people. These are people that believe in no violence. Unlike your question, you believe in violence.
All right, so that was Donald Trump speaking a little while earlier in Florida after he cast his vote. And also to help us make sense of how things are playing out at this moment, we're being joined by Mr. Jay Chabria, who's recently served as the chief strategist and general consultant for Senator J.D. Vance's nationally watched campaign. Is joining us on this broadcast. Mr. Chabria, let me in fact start off by asking you this market volatility that has been witnessed earlier in the morning when the markets opened up. You know, the stocks that are related to Donald Trump's business interests, and also Palantir Technologies, that is backed by Peter Thiel, who is also seen as someone who has backed J.D. Vance. They were up pretty dramatically, over 23%, but they've closed in the red. What do you make of the fact that the markets seem to have initially started off with a surge, but then have cooled off on the stocks that back the Trump campaign?
Well, look, I have no idea what the stock markets and how they relate to the election. What I'm pretty confident is that Donald Trump's going to be the next president of the United States, and J.D. Vance will be the next vice president of the United States. And look, there's other indicators that matter a lot more than what the stock market is. I think there's a lot of prognosticators that look at everything from the weather to the stock market to what a college professor in some university says. But when you look at the early voting numbers and you look at the polling numbers and you look at the issues that are driving Americans, it's very clear that the Trump campaign is in the driver's seat for this election.
You mentioned that the Trump campaign is in the driver's seat, and you also want to discount how the stock markets have behaved. But this is about the business sentiment of how people are looking as to what is unfolding at this moment in American politics. But besides that, you know, I also want you to weigh in terms of how the Republicans have gone about this entire election. Donald Trump has said that this is the best presidential campaign that he fought. This is better than 2016. Yeah. This is better than 2020. But for it to stick, he's got to win this election. And at this moment, it's going right down to the wire. And it'll be down to those few battleground states. Do you think Donald Trump can actually flip some of those battleground states in his favor, especially Pennsylvania?
I do. And look, I've been in all 7 of the battleground states, or I'm sorry, I should say 5 of the 7 battleground states in the last 2 days, flying around on the campaign. And what I can tell you is that the Trump campaign this election cycle, is the strongest campaign by far that they've ever had. They've got a very professional organization. They've got a great message. They've got great rallies, and the support has been tremendous. So I actually think that they're probably the favorite in almost all of the battleground states that you talk about. Mm-hmm. And look, the battleground states are Georgia, they're North Carolina, Nevada, Arizona, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. And I think that if you had to look at it, I think they're the favorites in all of the states. Michigan's probably the biggest toss-up to me right now, but I think that they can actually have a very good night tonight, and I think it's probably going to win.
Okay, you're saying you're pretty confident that they're going to win. But also let's talk about the message that Donald Trump and J.D. Vance have sent out in this case. Now, Kamala Harris has been very strongly out saying that women need to have the choice to get an abortion if they need to. And this really does look like the Achilles heel of the Trump campaign. Now, women are out, they're voting in big numbers. The issue of abortion, you know, the freedom to get a medically assisted abortion if a woman needs it, is something that goes right deep down into the American psyche. And here, do you think Donald Trump and his campaign has been on the back foot?
Well, look, I think that it's been very clear that Donald Trump has said that he supports sending it back to the states. So whatever, we have a federalist election, a federalist type of government in America where states have a lot of say, and every state can have a different policy. I think that's a very clear thing. But when you look at polling, and polling has been very consistent for the last 2 years, there's 2 issues that are driving this election, and that's almost indisputable. One is the economy, and that's inflation, because we've had tremendous inflation in this country because people can't actually afford to put groceries on the table when they could 4 years ago, and that's a big difference between the time Donald Trump was president and where he is now. And the second issue is illegal immigration. We have a tremendously porous southern border where Mexicans and folks from the drug cartel are coming in illegally into America, and that is having a huge effect on the economy and in people's jobs and in the way in which they live all across the country. Those are the 2 issues that drive not just Republicans but independents in this country and some moderate Democrats as well too. Right. And that's why you've seen this race, why you've seen Donald Trump polling so much better than he has in past elections.
Economy seems to be the issue that Donald Trump wants to hit home hard. He believes that this is the issue which will win him this election.
It's not that he believes it. It's not that he believes it. It's also the issue that everyone else believes too. When you look at polls, it's about 35, 40% where that's their number one issue, the economy, inflation, jobs. So it's not just his, it's everyone's.
But the thing is, how does Donald Trump intend to actually change and bring about the changes that the American people are expecting of the American economy? A lot of Donald Trump's rhetoric has been about, the balance of payment disadvantage that the United States of America has with China. He wants to increase tariffs with China, with Europe, with other parts of the world. And this has been his pet grievance. But the fact is, if you increase tariffs, that's also going to make things much more expensive for people within the United States. So how do you respond to that?
Well, so there's something that I would tell you is that Donald Trump actually was president 4 years ago. And there were a lot of people, myself included, that were very skeptical of what Donald Trump would be as president. But the fact of the matter is our prices were lower, the economy was booming, and we were in better shape 4 years ago. And that's what voters will take with them when they go into the voting booth today as the polls are about to close. They're going to go and say, was I better off 4 years ago, or am I better off today? And it's a pretty clear answer. And I think that that's the fundamental reason that Donald Trump is going to be president. So look, you can say that his policies would increase prices, but there's already evidence of what happened.
If you're putting tariffs on imports that come in from Europe and China, from India, from other places,
sure,
then that is obviously going to increase prices, which will have to be paid for by the common American people.
Well, there are economists that say that, but there are economists that say the other way too, and especially it depends on your entire macroeconomic plan. And again, Americans have had an opportunity to actually witness what a Donald Trump economic policy would be, and their lives were better, prices were cheaper, and by the way, they were actually putting more pressure on China too, and that's a good thing for America. Look, one of the things that we've had in this country is our manufacturing base has gone overseas, mostly to China, and I think that's something that Trump and Vance want to bring back.
Now, Kamala Harris, all through her campaigning, she said that her way of doing governance would be to provide for the American middle class and the poorer sections of the American society, but taxing the super rich. She said she would tax the super rich so that the benefits of that wealth can be divided much more equitably within the society. Donald Trump has said that he wants to reduce taxes. But what is interesting is that if he's cutting taxes predominantly for the billionaire class. How does that help the common, the middle class, and the poorer sections of the American society?
So I would actually reject the premise of your question. I think that is exactly what Kamala Harris would want to say, but I don't think that's actually.
That is what the Democrats are saying. This is a chart that you have to respond to.
Well, we've responded, and I think the answer is going to be in the ballot box today when Trump and Vance are victorious. I think that's what the answer is going to be. Certainly, the Democrats want that to be the message, but that is not the history of the Trump presidency. He delivered tax cuts for the middle class. He delivered tax cuts for working class people. And what you're seeing in the Republican Party, what is very interesting, is from 20 years ago, it was absolutely the party of the wealthy, and what's happened under Trump is it's become the party of the working class. Union voters, people that are blue collar, that work 9-to-5 jobs, that work in factories, they're coming into the Republican Party in droves, and that's really fundamentally the problem the Democrats have is that they're losing their base in terms of working class voters, and they're also losing black men too. So look, you actually brought up the gender gap earlier too when you talked about abortion, but the Democrats have a huge problem too with men. Men are leaving the Democratic Party in droves, and so there's a gender gap on both sides certainly, but I think it's going to actually have a bigger effect on the Democrat side than it is the Republican side.
You're candid enough to admit that there is a gender gap, and you're also admitting that more number of men are voting for the Republicans, but is the Republican Party leaving out the other half of the demographic where it is not catering to women who make up 50% of the society?
Look, there's always been a gender gap in Republican politics, and that's always been something. But what I'm arguing here is that there's a bigger gender gap that's actually that's happening on the Democratic side now too, whereas the Republicans have actually maintained where they have always been, the parity there. So certainly there's a gender gap. That is something that's happening. That's something happening in society in America all across, where there's a cleave in between men and women, and we got to bring that back together. But I really do think that because of the working class values that Republicans are bringing to the party, they're going to bring more women along too, on people that vote on more than just a single issue.
All right, we'll have to leave there. Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Jay Chabria, for joining us and getting us that perspective in terms of how you see this election, of course, is panning out. So these are some images from the polling stations in the United States of America, where you can see these are the final few hours before polling will, of course, come to an end. This is the moment of truth in American politics. Which way will the cookie crumble? That, of course, is the big question. Who has an edge? No one at this moment wants to stick their neck out. If you were to talk to the Democrats, they say they are in the lead. If you talk to the Republicans, they claim that they are in the lead. But the pollsters, and remember, the pollsters can get it wrong. They got it spectacularly wrong in 2016 when every single pollster was predicting that Hillary Clinton would beat Donald Trump hands down. A lot of the pollsters are giving a very slender 1% advantage to Kamala Harris, but they're also giving 3% as the margin of error. So we need to actually still wait and watch in the next few hours once the counting of the votes begins and we start getting a clear picture as to which way the American people have voted. And we've also been tracking the developments with our Voice of America correspondents across the United States of America. And our next report gets you their reportage from the ground as to what is happening at this moment in this very crucial election in the United States.
Momentum is.
Keep in mind, Virginia, like so many other states, had a surge in early voting, not enough to overcome the numbers that we saw in 2020. Certainly about a third of registered voters voted early, primarily women and young people here in the state of Virginia. More broadly, the the early vote coming a lot more rural voters and a lot more Republican voters because, as you said earlier, Donald Trump has encouraged the early vote amongst the Republicans, unlike 4 years ago.
If he said it on camera, I think voters will hold him to it. If he said that he will concede if the vote is fair. Now, remember, though, he kind of set the seed early on in this campaign, or maybe about 2 weeks ago, he started saying, if we don't win, that means there was fraud involved. So he's already planted that seed in voters' heads. So for him to say that today is good news in the fact that he may accept the outcome, unlike 4 years ago.
But one thing that the Harris campaign is saying is that they are also very much prepared for the kind of legal election challenge, and also issues with certification of results that may arise from the Trump campaign. They say that they are ready to fight this with facts and ready to fight it with their own legal army of people who will fight for every vote to be counted.
Every balloting polling station we've been to, there's been a steady stream of people coming in, even during sort of the off hours, not the hours where they were going to work or on their lunch break. So a lot of enthusiasm. They seem to be indicating to us that the economy is the top issue. And that appears to be the case for both Republicans and Democrats, as well as independent voters.
For all the latest news, download the WION app and subscribe to our YouTube channel.